Our next speaker is Jure Leskovec, back on the stage, Associate Professor of Computer Science, Chief Scientist at Pinterest, Investigator at Chan Zuckerberg Biohub, Co-Director of the Stanford Data Science Initiative, SDSI. Welcome back.
Great. So I have a big talk, so I'll go ahead. So what I'll talk to you today about is about graph neural networks. So here's the motivation and what we are trying to do. If you think about today's modern deep learning, machine learning toolbox, it's basically specialized to do process two very simple data types, essentially fixed size matrices and grids. What does this mean? In computer vision, we can resize everything to be of the same size, so we are very good at processing fixed size grid data. And in text and speech, what we are good at processing is linear sequence-based data. And that's what we can do today. And really, if you kind of think for half a second, you quickly realize that not everything can be represented as a fixed size grid or as a linear sequence. So the question then becomes, how do we develop neural networks that are much more broadly applicable to kind of complex data types and allow us to extend the notion of representation learning, deep learning, to much richer and much more interesting domains? And this really opens frontiers beyond classical neural networks that, as I said, learn on sequences and learn on fixed size matrices or grid graphs. So what I'm interested in is extending and developing fundamental new technologies that allow us to apply or extend the notion of representation learning to complex data types, and in particular, network graph data. What I mean by that is traditional network graph data like social networks, but more interesting things as well, like, for example, knowledge graphs. I'll talk to you about that, where you are basically taking data, information, knowledge that you have about a given process and encoding it into a set of relationships. Biological systems and biological properties are naturally modeled as graphs of interacted entities. You can think of complex machines, engineering systems, IoT-type devices, where again you have a set of components and dependencies between them and you'd like to model that. Molecules is another example that is naturally a graph, interactions between a set of atoms. And you can even think of text or computer code, program code, as again a set of instructions that are interacting with each other, so that naturally again gives you the relational structure over which you can learn. And the goal here is, right, that we will take these graphs and we will learn how to do automatic feature representation learning based on the graph network structure as well as the feature information. And the goal will be that basically, given this type of relational data, we will learn descriptors from them, what we will call feature representation or embeddings. So an example, or what we would like to do conceptually, is that we would like to take this structural network-based data with rich feature information as the input to some deep neural network. So at the other end, we are able to make predictions at the level of individual nodes, predictions at the level of pairs of nodes, so links. We would like to be able to use this to generate graphs, for example, generate novel molecules, make predictions at the level of subgraphs, things like that. So any kind of task at the output. So why is this hard? Why would, this conceptual picture that I showed you, why wouldn't it work? The reason why this doesn't work is because networks are complex and they are of arbitrary size. Right? So as we know how to resize an image, we don't know, or it's impossible to resize a network. Images and text, they have nice linear structure, right? It's clear what is on the top, it's clear what's on the bottom, it's clear where is left, and it's clear where it's right. Networks have no spatial locality, have no kind of organization where we could kind of say what is left and what is right. And what is more interesting is networks are dynamic and have multimodal features and attributes attached to their structure. So the way we want to make progress here is to basically take this notion of convolutional operators that have been so successful in computer vision, but generalize this to this type of complex network data. And the goal is that we want to basically have a convolutional operator, like a sliding window, that we'd like to slide over the network. But as I try to show you here, it's not clear what this sliding operator would be. So the main insight that allows us to make progress is to basically say, let the relational structure define the neural network structure. So essentially, if I want to make a computation prediction for a given node in the network, then on the right-hand side, I show you the neural network structure to make the computation. Why does the network look like that? It looks like that because node A is connected to nodes B, C, and D. So in the neural network, there are B, C, and D. And then, for example, the node B has two neighbors, A and C. So that's why there are A and C here. While, for example, node C has 4 neighbors. So this is why there are 4 neighbors there. So this means that every node in the network defines its own neural network structure, its own computation graph. And what we want to do now is to learn these operators, these boxes that learn how to take information from the children, combine it with the own information at the node, and pass it on. Why is this interesting and fundamentally different how we used to think about neural networks? Is because every node now defines its own neural network structure. So rather than pumping enormous amounts of data through a fixed neural network architecture, here every node defines its own neural network architecture. So all of a sudden, we are learning over billions of different neural networks. And you can see how different nodes have different architectures. For example, the blue node D has a kind of thin and narrow architecture. For example, the green node C has a much more high fan-out neural network architecture. So with this, we can now take this idea that where basically the relational structure defines the computation graph and apply it across a huge number of domains. Anything from knowledge graphs, financial transactions, sensor network, IoT data, to biomedical EHR type data, social information networks. We are even applying this to large-scale physics simulations where we want to speed up and use neural networks to speed up realistic physics-based simulations for various kind of natural phenomena and things like that. So what I want to do now is I want to give you an example of 3 applications of this technology. And the common sense is that the common theme will be identifying, using the relational structure, even though it might not be most obvious, to make us better predictions. The first one is something that we actually have running in production at Pinterest that's making large-scale recommendations to hundreds of millions of people, and this is in production, industrial scale, and robust. So this technology is mature, and it's really state-of-the-art. So what's the idea? The idea is that whenever we are trying to compare different images, if we just compare images based on their content, computer vision will make a lot of silly mistakes. For example, it will confuse the garden fence with a bed railing. It will confuse ground meat and soil. It will confuse a rug with a tapestry on the wall and things like that. So the question is, can we use graph information to learn how to borrow information from nearby images in the Pinterest graph to make much better predictions and make much better recommendations? And if we are able to do this, then we can use this in search, what is called related pins, for ads, for shopping, and a lot of other places. So what we want to do is we want to know what pins, what images are related, right? So if I'm given a pin of a cake, another similar cake is a related image and a sweater is not. And using a lot of user interaction data, we can basically get notions of what is related and what is not related. And of course, we could just say, let's take individual images, let's put them in the embedding space such that the distances between cake 1 and cake 2 will be smaller than the distance between the cake and the sweater. And if you do this, it doesn't really work too well, as I will show you next. But what you can do is you can use the Pinterest graph and kind of unroll it, as I try to show here, so that you learn that basically cake is next to other cakes and sweater is next to other sweaters. So even if a sweater may look like a cake, based on the information of other sweaters around, you can kind of decide that that sweater is a sweater, and a cake that looks like a sweater, again, will co-appear with other cakes, so you'll be able to make the correct prediction. And if we do that, we get some great results. One important thing is that we are doing this over 3 billion images. And all we really care about is to identify the correct similar image among the top 100 out of the 3 billion. So we are really learning this at a super fine-grained level of resolution. And the point is that based on user interaction data, we are able to get examples of related objects. So we have a query, let's say pin image, and we know what other image is related. We don't know what is not related, so we usually take random images to be able to say, take the source and the positive, map it closer together than the source and the negative. But the point is that negatives are too easy, so you will never be able to learn at this resolution, this precision that says, I only care about the top 100 closest images out of 3 billion. So we have this notion of curriculum training where we would actually identify hard negative examples and use that to the learner so that the learner learns to high precision. So why is this the case here? If you look very carefully, the first 2 cards are actually about thank you type cards, while the last card is a happy birthday card. And even though visually this kind of looks the same, it really couldn't be more different. So we want to use these hard negative examples to force the model to really do the thing well. If we do this, here is our performance compared using basically this graph-based approach that combines even image information on a graph compared to using a single image information and compared using a textual information. And you see the difference that is quite striking. And this is now basically the best embeddings we have at Pinterest. To give you an example, for a query image of some Californians cutting down a big tree, if you just do visual comparison, you see kind of stylistically it matches, maybe topically it matches, it's some farmers, some soldiers, but it's really nothing about old school logging. If you use textual information or the graph itself, you get kind of logging, but it doesn't match visually. And at the bottom, when we are combining basically graph plus visual, we get very good recommendations. Again, people cutting down trees in Santa Cruz Mountains or something like that. So that's the first thing I wanted to show. The second thing I wanted to show is for computational drug discovery, and in particular doing prediction of side effects. If in the first case we were looking at a large-scale graph of tens of billions of edges, here we'll be looking at a heterogeneous network. And in the first case, in the Pinterest example, we were looking at individual nodes. Here we will be looking at pairs of nodes, predicting links. The problem is the following. Many patients today take multiple drugs to treat coexisting and complex diseases. So in US, half of the people over 70 are on at least 5 drugs simultaneously. And the issue is that that drugs may interact in all kinds of adverse side effects, and it's a combinatorial explosion, so we can never test this in drug trials. When we do drug trials, we test every drug individually. So the question is, if you take a combination of drugs, will this lead to some new complex side effects that we did not expect? The way we do this is we create a heterogeneous network of drugs where drugs are labeled by different side effects they cause by being taken together. These are side effects that are interaction side effects. So this is not just if drug A gives you some effect and drug B then taken together, they give you additional side effects. So this is the first stop. It's what do we know about drug interactions? We have about 1,000 different side effects. And for example, drugs CNS give you 3 different side effects. Then we also know how drugs work. The way drugs work is that they change the chemistry of our body. And the way that happens is through the proteins that the drugs target. So we know how drugs target proteins. That's basically the mechanism by which they work. And then we also know how proteins in the body collaborate and work with each other to allow for biological functions and processes. So what is now drug side effect prediction in this heterogeneous network? It's prediction of novel links, right? Saying if you take these 2 drugs together, what kind of side effects will happen? We are able to use the same technology as I was showing you so far. We are getting about 36% improvement in making this our current state of the art. Perhaps more impressively, we ask our model, what are the top 10 predictions that you are most confident about that we don't know about yet? Here they are. You can take a photo, so if you are ever prescribed these things, be careful about the things on the right. Why is this interesting is because we actually went to the clinical notes and we were able to verify 5 out of these 10. So essentially we were able to find isolated evidence and isolated research, as you see, all very novel or very recent, that actually gives us some evidence that these predictions are actually correct. And for other predictions, they serve as good hypothesis or for what to test next in biological labs. So that, and what we are doing right now, working both with hospitals, Harvard Medical School and hospitals in the Boston area, as well as the Stanford Medicine, to basically go and be able to verify our predictions using their patient data. What is also interesting here is that we can make predictions even for the drugs that have never been prescribed yet or haven't even been developed yet. So our methodology allows us to do that. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is reasoning in knowledge graphs. So the idea here is the following. I have a knowledge graph of different entities and different types of relations between entities. And this can be anything, like, facts about art and people liking art, but it can be about biological entities, can be about common sense knowledge, anything. And the way we think of this is that we have these heterogeneous graphs that capture the domain knowledge. And like Alice is friends with Bob, or Paris is a city, and things like that. And you can have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, millions of entities, tens of thousands of different relations. And the question then becomes, can we reason over these complex graph structures? Can we answer complex logical queries or make complex predictions over these graphs? So here's a question. You could say, where did all Canadian citizens that won the Turing Award graduate? That's a question. You can write it in a logical form, but if you have a knowledge graph, you can also write it as this kind of query template, where you say, I want to go from Turing Award over the Wien relation, from Canada over the citizen relation, and from there to the graduate relation, and I will end up with the answer. Why is this challenging? This is challenging because it's very hard computationally to fit these query graphs on an example knowledge graph. Another key challenge is that if you have a couple of relations missing, you won't be able to answer your query, right? So if you don't know that, let's say, Hinton won a Turing Award and you don't know where Benjo graduated, then you are not able to answer this query, right? So with just 2 missing relations, we don't know who are Canadians who won the Turing Award and when they graduated. So the question is, how do we reason over this kind of highly noisy, incomplete knowledge graph data and be able to answer arbitrary logical queries over them? So our idea is that we'll take the knowledge graph, map it into this embedding space, and then come up with and use logical queries and execute them on top of the embedding space. So the idea is the following. I'll take the nodes of the entities of the knowledge graph, embed them. For every logical operator, we will learn a spatial operator so that we can then paste or kind of paste these logical operators one after another to identify the answer. So the idea is that you can ask me any kind of arbitrary logical query, and I will think of that as a prediction task. I will decompose the query into a set of operations. I will execute operations in the embedding space and give you the answer. So just to give you an example, what's our key insight? Our key insight is to represent queries as boxes in the embedding space. And I'll quickly show you why is this a good idea. So imagine I want to answer these queries about Canadian citizens where they graduated. The way I will do this is to say, let's start with the Turing Award node and let's apply the win operator that will give me a given box. And let's start with a Canada, go over a citizen operator, and that will give me a box. Now I know how to take an AND, an intersection, and that gives me a new box. So that now I can apply another operator called graduated from that will cover the entities that are actually answer to my query. And it turns out that you can actually do this, even though I give you everything as small 2-dimensional example. You can really learn to do this and answer arbitrary queries. And what we find out is that basically we can reason reliably on knowledge graphs with missing edges. We can basically implicitly impute missing and noisy relations, and we are getting 36% improvement over simple point-based embeddings. And we are able to answer query structures that we have never seen before and questions we have never seen during training. So this is something we are super excited about and has kind of implications in many different areas, from question answering AI all the way to making complex predictions. So let me conclude and I can take questions, right? So kind of what's the main point? The main point is that we are able to generalize representation learning to much more complex data types than fixed size grids and sequences. And this really opens new frontiers beyond classical neural network learning that what we have been used so far. And this type of framework is applied to many different tasks, from node predictions, link prediction, subgraph prediction. Tomorrow, one of my students will talk about novel molecule generation methods that are using this technology and so on. So what did we learn in this fast-paced research area in the last 2 years? That this representation learning paradigm can be extended to relational data, that no human feature engineering is necessary, that we can effectively combine node attribute data with the network information and find the optimal balance between the two. So these types of approaches will always beat the approaches without the network because we can trade off. It gives us state-of-the-art results in a number of domains and tasks and allows for end-to-end training, multi-stage approaches to allow us for better performance. So with this, I'm done. I thank my students, postdocs, and many of you guys with who I'm working. Thank you for data, problems, and funding. Thank you very much.
Hello. Maybe I'm not so familiar with Pinterest, but just a couple of questions on that. So what was the definition of the links between nodes in the Pinterest graph? Was it like hyperlinks?
Yes, I did not explain that. So what was the relationship is the way you can think of Pinterest is you can think of it as a bipartite graph where people organize images into collections.
Okay.
So it's what collections has an image been put to. So if you'd be an e-commerce site, you could say, I have products and baskets are the nodes, and what products are put together in the baskets, that's your bipartite.
I see, so the co-occurrence of images in someone's handcrafted collection.
For example.
I see. And was the conclusion from those Pinterest slides, was it that the representations of images learned over these graphs, that was better for building an end-to-end recommendation system, and that end-to-end system was better than a system trained only on clicks, or?
So the conclusion is that you can get much better and much more robust visual embeddings if you are also accounting for images that co-occur or that are structurally similar close in the graph.
I see.
That's the conclusion.
So basically putting these images into an embedding space that took into account neighboring images.
So maybe the way to think of that is, if you think, let's say, in the social network way, if you want to make prediction about myself, you can use my features. If you know who my friends are and you are able to use information from them to enrich my own description, you'll do better. And that's essentially the bottom line, right? And now, if my friend's information is useful for the prediction task, great. If it's not, still fine,
okay.
Right? And because of the relational graph structure, this allows you to do much better.
Okay, very cool.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Great talk. But with this representation, you lose the capability for transfer learning, right? So how much data will need for training this type of graph?
You totally don't lose the ability for transfer learning. So a student in my group tomorrow will talk about pre-training, which is very important in scientific domains. The other thing is, what is elegant here is that you can really apply this to massive graphs where you don't even have to see the entire graph because all you care about are the little neural network structures. So you can train on half of them and apply to the other half. So it means these graphs can evolve. You can transfer this from one graph to another because you've never seen it. All this works beautifully. I did not mention that. Great point. It's definitely doable, and we are doing it every day. Thank you.